Chapter 2. Japan in the context of the economic crisis. 1. The financial crisis and the sending of Japanese troops to Shandong. The influence of the Chinese Revolution. Japanese capitalism has historically been closely associated with China. For Japan, China was primarily the most important source of raw materials, iron ore, coal and other minerals, which Japan is poor in. In addition, neighboring China was the main market for Japanese industry, because Japan's domestic market was very narrow. 35% of all Japanese exports went to Chinese ports. China was of great importance as a sphere of application of Japanese capital. Japanese investment in China. The main investment in Japan went to China's textile industry, and the South Manchu Railway was vital for Japan. By 1927, Japanese investment in Manchuria alone reached 2,500 million yen. In this regard, the development of the Chinese Revolution created enormous difficulties on the path of stabilizing Japanese capitalism. The strike, which broke out in February 1925 at the Japanese spinning and weaving mill in Shanghai, developed into an uprising. In June, the strike covered all Shanghai textile enterprises. Chinese merchants in Shanghai stopped trading. The city was announced 93 martial law. Japan threw down its ground forces to suppress the strike in Shanghai, reaching such senseless cruelty as the shooting of strikers by artillery fire. These actions of Japan led to the fact that the strike movement soon spread to Hong Kong, Hangzhou, Qingdao, Tianjin and other cities. The movement against Japanese imperialism swept the whole country. These events were closely intertwined with the complex contradictions between the imperialist powers that broke out around the Conference on Customs Duties. All this made the stabilization of Japanese capitalism even more difficult. Representatives of the highest financial circles of Japan have long insisted on lifting the embargo on the export of gold, believing that this will be the first step towards stabilizing Japanese capitalism. However, only the rise of the anti-imperialist movement in China, in the second half of 1926, the Chinese Revolution set as its main goal the expulsion of imperialist forces from southern China. This dealt a serious blow to British capitalism, which had concessions in this area of China. At the same time, the impression was created that from the point of view of international relations, such a development of the revolution would strengthen the Japanese position in China. In reality, these events, on the contrary, led to the complete collapse of the business operations of the Taiwan Bank, which was closely associated with Japanese enterprises in southern China, which served as the most important cause of the financial crisis. As a result of World War I, European powers and the United States were forced to temporarily withdraw from the Chinese market. Using this exceptional case, the Taiwan Bank set the goal of pursuing a flexible economic policy towards China, playing a big role in saving Chinese finances from extreme exhaustion, and in response to the need for industrial capital, 94 moving to China. 21. In 1919, the total amount of loans of this bank to China amounted to 25,760,000 yen. However, the unprecedented scale of the Chinese Revolution made it difficult for the bank to further intervene in the Chinese economy, jeopardizing all of its investments in China and forcing it to come to terms with the need to withdraw them. The development of the revolution led to the fact that at the end of 1923 the branch of the Taiwan Bank in Zhejiang was closed, playing the role of its outpost in central China. In June 1925, the bank branch in Suzhou was half liquidated. This significantly worsened the position of the Taiwan Bank, and in 1925 it reduced its capital by 1/4. However, the bank's affairs continued to deteriorate, and by 1927, the year of its collapse, the bank's investment in China amounted to only 17% of 1919 investments. Since 1927, the wave of the Chinese Revolution began to move north. In March-April 1927, the National Revolutionary Army occupied Shanghai. The Chinese Revolution has entered a new phase. Around the same period, a financial crisis erupted in Japan, causing a further exacerbation of the crisis of Japanese capitalism. The financial crisis of 1927, an earthquake in the Kanto area 22 in September 1923, a huge natural disaster, caused a severe blow to the Japanese capitalism is in the grip of post-war crisis. No wonder they say, trouble does not come alone. Natural disaster has caused a crisis, commonly referred to as an earthquake crisis. The restoration of the capital made it necessary to resort to a passive foreign trade balance. All construction savings of 4 war years were spent on construction work. 95. The situation in the country after the crisis caused by the earthquake forced the government to issue a state loan, the so-called earthquake relief loan, in the amount of over 1 billion yen, and to publish a law on compensation for losses on the accounting of bills associated with the earthquake. By such measures, the government sought to save the ruined banks and part of the privileged trading houses, that is, to help financial capital, which suffered a sensitive blow. The bills related to the earthquake represented various debt documents for which payment was to be made in the area where the earthquake occurred, documents issued by persons who owned enterprises in the earthquake area, and documents recorded by banks the day before this event, then have all the bills calculations on which as a result of an earthquake became impossible. In order for these bills to become valid, banks put a special stamp on them. These bills are accounted for by the Japanese bank. In order to protect the bank from losses that it might have incurred as a result of accounting for bills, the government decided to pay him compensation in the amount of not more than 100 million yen. The deadline for the secondary accounting of bills associated with the earthquake was set until the end of September 1925. However, the bill was not completed by the scheduled date, and it again had to be extended. The deadline for registering bills was scheduled for late September 1927, but even before that it became clear that the government compensation of 100 million yen issued to the bank was clearly insufficient. Banks put a special stamp on them. These bills are accounted for by the Japanese bank. In order to protect the bank from losses that it might have incurred as a result of accounting for bills, the government decided to pay him compensation in the amount of not more than 100 million yen. The deadline for the secondary accounting of bills associated with the earthquake was set until the end of September 1925. However, the bill was not completed by the scheduled date, and it again had to be extended. The deadline for registering bills was scheduled for late September 1927, but even before that it became clear that the government compensation of 100 million yen issued to the bank was clearly insufficient. Banks put a special stamp on them. These bills are accounted for by the Japanese bank. In order to protect the bank from losses that it might have incurred as a result of accounting for bills, the government decided to pay him compensation in the amount of not more than 100 million yen. The deadline for the secondary accounting of bills associated with the earthquake was set until the end of September 1925. However, the bill was not completed by the scheduled date, and it again had to be extended. The deadline for registering bills was scheduled for late September 1927, but even before that it became clear that the government compensation of 100 million yen issued to the bank was clearly insufficient. The government decided to pay him compensation in the amount of not more than 100 million yen. The deadline for the secondary accounting of bills associated with the earthquake was set until the end of September 1925. However, the bill was not completed by the scheduled date, and it again had to be extended. The deadline for registering bills was scheduled for late September 1927, but even before that it became clear that the government compensation of 100 million yen issued to the bank was clearly insufficient. The government decided to pay him compensation in the amount of not more than 100 million yen. The deadline for the secondary accounting of bills associated with the earthquake was set until the end of September 1925. However, the bill was not completed by the scheduled date, and it again had to be extended. The deadline for registering bills was scheduled for late September 1927, but even before that it became clear that the government compensation of 100 million yen issued to the bank was clearly insufficient. In this regard, concern has arisen in financial circles. To compensate for the damage incurred by the Japanese bank, Wakatsuki Reiichiro's office provided him with a loan of 100 million yen. In an effort to resolve the issue of payment of bills in banks financed by the Japanese bank, the government prepared a bill on measures to account for bills associated with the earthquake, and a bill on loans, 96, compensating for the damage from the accounting of these bills. These bills aimed at providing banks with a loan for a period of 10 years. Together with the previous one, the last loan was to be 270 million yen. However, opposition parties have turned this purely financial issue into a political issue. During the discussion in Parliament of the bill, it turned out that the distrust of bills related to the earthquake increased concern about banks with these bills. The matter ended with the fact that on March 15, 1927, the day after the speech of the Minister of Finance, Kota Oharu, whose unsuccessful phrase caused a panic, the Tokyo-based Watanabe Ginko Bank and the Akatsuki Totaiku Ginko Deposit Bank ceased operations. Thus, in Japan 2 years before the global economic crisis of 1929, a financial crisis erupted. On March 19, Nakai Ginko Bank ceased operations. Concerned depositors immediately began to besiege all Tokyo banks, demanding the issuance of deposits. On the same day, a massive withdrawal of deposits from the Nakano Ginko Bank also began. In an effort to end the panic, the Japanese bank and Yoreku Ginko Bank agreed to issue a loan, soften the terms of the loan, and other events. It was reported that at that time, emergency payments by the Japanese bank exceeded 100 million yen. On March 22, Tokyo Bank's Matsubiya Ginko, Nakazawa Ginko, Hashijayong Ginko and Yokohama Bank Soda Ginko were forced to announce the cessation of operations. It was already impossible to prevent the development of the financial crisis. Finance Minister Koto Oka and Japan Bank manager Ichikyo Tohiko issued a joint statement on stabilizing the financial situation and overcoming panic, but the situation has not improved. Moreover, panic spread to the province. On March 22, there was a massive withdrawal of deposits from the banks of Hisaki Ginko, Uruvishijo Ginko, Saitama Prefecture, Kuwaban Ginko, Kyoto, Kawasaki Ginko, Kanagawa Prefecture, Asanuma Ginko, 97, Gifu Prefecture, and others. And on March 23 from Tokushima Ginko Bank, Tokushima Prefecture, and other banks. Some of these banks have completely ceased operations. In the end, the government and the ad hoc committee agreed on a bill to record bills related to the earthquake, and the latter was passed by the upper house of Parliament. Although after these events the impression was created that the crisis had somewhat softened, and the popular unrest had subsided, all these events could be seen only as the beginning of preparation for the upcoming upheavals. The reason for the new explosion was the question of the Suzuki Trading House and the Taiwan Bank, the situation of which was revealed on March 13 due to a speech in the upper house of the Minister of Finance Koto Oka. On April 2, the Suzuki Trading House instructed the Taiwan Bank to liquidate the firm's affairs, and its director Kaneko Naoyoshi resigned. The fact is that for a long time the Suzuki Trading House, which carried out sugar and camphor trading operations in Taiwan, was in special relations with the Taiwan Bank. Taking advantage of the extremely favorable situation during the First World War, the Suzuki House expanded its field of activity, taking up shipping, steel and rayon production, the operation of flour milling enterprises, etc. More than 60 companies were subordinate to it, but after the war, depression, most of them were in a difficult situation. Even rumors circulated that the bill on bills related to the earthquake had been adopted with the aim of saving the Suzuki Trading House. As a result of production stagnation in Taiwan, in South China and the countries of the South Seas, that is, in areas that were the field of activity of the Taiwan Bank, the latter provided a huge loan to the House of Suzuki. This led to the fact that the relationship between the Suzuki firm and the bank became extremely close. The bankruptcy of the firm would inevitably lead to the bankruptcy of the Taiwan Bank itself. Because of this, the bank provided the company with more and more 98 loans. The more they lend, the more they borrow. Finally, the total amount of the loan not returned by the firm reached 350 million yen. This, as we have already noted, contributed to the failure of Taiwan Bank operations in China and put it in an extremely difficult position. Taiwan Bank Financial Assistance Project and Wakatsuki Cabinet dropped to provide financial assistance to the Taiwan Bank. The Wakatsuki government prepared a draft imperial decree on providing financial assistance to the bank in the amount of 200 million yen on April 14, presenting the draft to the Privy Council. On April 17, the Privy Council rejected this project, as a result of which Wakatsuki's cabinet was forced to resign. Just at that time, the party's charter was revised at the Extraordinary Congress of the Seiukai Party, which opened on April 15, and former Minister General Toa Naka became its new president. The resignation of the Wakatsuki government made the prospects of financial assistance to the Taiwan Bank very shaky, and on April 18 a huge crowd of depositors besieged the main office of the bank, demanding the issuance of deposits. All branches of the bank, both domestically and abroad, were forced to stop operations. The total debt amounted to 890 million yen, with 28 million required to cover urgent debts. But there was no hope of receiving these 28 million yen, which was the reason for the cessation of operations. The collapse of the Taiwan Bank led to the cessation of operations of the Osaka Emi Ginko Bank. And in this tense situation, when the unstable situation in financial circles made us assume that there was an even stronger panic ahead, on April 19, the emperor entrusted the formation of a new government to General Toanaka. Formally, the Privy Council rejected the submission. 99. The Wakatsuki cabinet draft imperial decree, because there was supposedly still time to convene an extraordinary session of parliament, and that the adoption of such a draft is a violation of Article 78 of the Constitution. In reality, it was not a matter of simple constitutional formalities. The fact is that although the Privy Council was aware that ignoring the threat of a crisis within the country would entail enormous sacrifices, in the current situation he considered the change in policy regarding China to be the most necessary. This was precisely what he was guided by, rejecting the draft cabinet of Wakatsuki, as evidenced by the statement of Ito Miyoji, the chairman of the Bill Review Committee and one of his most ardent opponents. Proving the bankruptcy of the activities undertaken by the Wakatsuki government, Ito stated, "Not only the government measures taken in connection with this project, but also the activities on the issue of China are untenable. The government has lost the right orientation, it will lead us to the loss of national prestige, and the Japanese people cannot be silent in any case." As a result of the failure of the foreign policy of the government in China, several thousand of our compatriots living in this country are now in an extremely difficult position. Their lives and property are in danger. If there are extra funds that allow one bank to allocate a huge amount of 200 million yen, is it not better for the government to use them to provide financial assistance to the Japanese living in China? I am sure that only Prime Minister Wakatsuki and his subordinates agree with this completely unacceptable bill. As for the 70 millionth Japanese people, he resolutely rejects it. Judging by the words and deeds of Prime Minister Wakatsuki, there is no impression that he and Parliament and the Privy Council sought to avoid responsibility, but we cannot say that he clearly demonstrated his responsibility. Now the moment has come when it is necessary to actually find out this responsibility. 100. I would like Prime Minister Wakatsuki to pay the most serious attention to this issue today. Ito's speech was designed to force the government to resign. This was not criticism of the Wakatsuki cabinet for the lack of a basic course in economics aimed at preventing a crisis. As seen from Ito's statement, the government was criticized for its helpless foreign policy, especially with regard to China, for Japan's loss of national prestige. Therefore, it is natural to assume that behind the Privy Council, an Ito-backing movement began to overthrow the cabinet, organized by the Seikai Party associated with Mitsui. The leader of the Seikai Party, Suzuki Kozaburo, since his tenure in the Ministry of Justice, has been a staunch supporter of the vice-chairman of the Privy Council, Hiranuma Kiichiro. Therefore, he developed a frantic behind-the-scenes activity in support of Hieronymus Ito, who led the Privy Council. Sukhayi Party Secretary General Morikaku was closely associated with the military and nurtured plans for an active policy towards China. Just at the time when the Privy Council was considering a bill submitted by the cabinet, Morikaku, along with Yamamoto Zitoro, who took over as president of the South Manchurian Railway Company, made a trip to China. However, he soon returned and called by telegram Yamamoto. Having summarized all these facts, we can conclude that the Wakatsuki cabinet was overthrown by the joint efforts of the military, the Privy Council and the Sukhayi Matsui Party, which sought to revise China's policy. When the Privy Council considered the bill submitted by the cabinet, Morikaku, along with Yamamoto Zitoro, who served as president of the South Manchurian Railway Company, made a trip to China. However, he soon returned and called by telegram Yamamoto. Having summarized all these facts, we can conclude that the Wakatsuki cabinet was overthrown by the joint efforts of the military, the Privy Council and the Sukhayi Matsui Party, which sought to revise China's policy. When the Privy Council considered the bill submitted by the cabinet, Morikaku, along with Yamamoto Zitoro, who served as president of the South Manchurian Railway Company, made a trip to China. However, he soon returned and called by telegram Yamamoto. Having summarized all these facts, we can conclude that the Wakatsuki cabinet was overthrown by the joint efforts of the military, the Privy Council and the Sukhayi Matsui Party, which sought to revise China's policy. The financial panic that erupted in Japan was growing. On April 19, the day the Wakatsuki cabinet resigned, the Kumo Ginko Bank, Shiga Prefecture, the Hiroshima Isshinai Ginko Bank, and the Osaka Izu Ginko Bank stopped operations. On April 20, when a new cabinet was formed, Hiroshima Bank Hiroshima 101 ceased Operation Sangyo Ginko and the Moji Ginko Bank in Moji. The Kuwait Tokaiku Ginko Deposit Bank went bankrupt. On April 21, Tokyo-based Daijigo Ginko, Yasuaki Ginko, Tokaido Varibiki Ginko Discount Bank and Akashi Shoko Ginko Merchant Bank and Akashi ceased operations. It was decided to stop operations of all banks, intermediary offices and other financial institutions of the country on April 22 to 23. Thus, the disaster reached its highest point. Investors burst into the most respectable banks even through windows. Help Tanaka's cabinet financial circles. The Tanaka government considered it its duty to help financial circles and review China's policies. Tanaka managed to keep the portfolio of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and put him on the post of Minister of Finance, Takahashi Korkyo, popular in financial circles. Takahashi's efforts to eliminate the financial panic were generally successful. So, on April 22, he published and immediately enforced a 3-week moratorium providing for deferred payments of monetary obligations on the basis of private law, as well as extending the term of bills and other documents guaranteed by law. On that day, the Japanese bank repaid 2,190 million yen as emergency loans. The record number of 2,318 million yen reached the issuance of credit tickets. April 25, all banks of the country resumed their work. The financial world began to gradually calm down. A little later, on May 10, the chairman of the board of the Japanese bank, Ichikyo Tohiko, was ousted and Inoue Junisuke was appointed in his place. At the 53rd emergency session of Parliament convened on May 3, laws were passed on a one-time lending to a Japanese bank in the amount of 500 million yen, on compensation for losses, as well as a law on the provision of financial assistance to a Taiwan bank in the amount of 200 million yen. Retroactively authorized 102 Order of the Minister of Finance to defer payments. To implement these measures, the government allocated amounts significantly exceeding the amount of 200 million yen provided by the previous cabinet for financing the Taiwan bank. It received the enormous amount of money necessary for this at the expense of colossal taxes levied on the people. Takahashi was faced with the task of providing financial assistance to the Zaibatsu at the expense of the people. And when he completed this task, he resigned June 2, losing the post of Minister of Finance Mitsushi Chuzo. In the midst of the financial crisis, as well as after its liquidation, a fast process of merging weak capital and provincial banks with large banks of the country took place. Amounts received in the form of emergency subsidies from the Japanese bank by weak banks passed from them into the hands of the largest banks in Japan. So it was established the dominance of the five leading banks, Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Yasuda and Daiichi. Bank failures dealt a crushing blow to industrial companies. As we saw in the relationship between the Taiwan Bank and the Suzuki Trading House, the relationship between banks and industry was extremely tight, with the result that the financial crisis had a huge impact on industry. For example, at the Kawasaki shipyards, the collapse was prevented with tremendous difficulty, and only thanks to the help of the Navy. Small and medium-sized enterprises went bankrupt one after another, especially in the textile industry. Unemployment grew uncontrollably, and social unrest intensified. On the other hand, Zaibatsu, grouped around the top five banks, pawed at all industries, tidying up medium and small enterprises. There is no doubt that in a financial crisis, monopoly capital would not have survived without state assistance. But the enormous capital necessary to provide this assistance was received by the state at the expense of the small contributions of the masses and at the expense of taxes levied on the population. This sharpened 103 the irreconcilable class contradictions, as a result of which the crisis of capitalism deepened even more. The Tanaka cabinet saw a way out of this crisis in an adventure sending troops to Shandong. Thus, the reduction in the export of goods to China in 1926 and the financial crisis in March-April 1927 were used by Japanese aggressive militarist groups to strengthen their power. Sending troops to Shandong and the Eastern Conference March 20, 1927, after the Chinese National Revolutionary Army occupied Shanghai, foreign troops were landed in China. During this period, the financial crisis has already begun in Japan. On March 27, the first Japanese squadron began to focus on the Shanghai raid. Sadeher's diplomacy, which was called compromising and weak diplomacy, revised its principle of non-interference. Seeing that the National Revolutionary Army, carrying out the Northern Campaign, reached northern China and Manchuria, the government of Tanaka on May 28, when the financial crisis was finally overcome, switched to active actions with the goal of holding down the forces of this army. under the pretext that in order to prevent adverse incidents that could erupt again, the need arose to protect the life and property of Japanese residents with the help of the army. 23. Troops were sent to Shandong, whose task was to block the path of the National Revolutionary Army, advancing from the south. This was the first dispatch of troops to Shandong. The Tanaka government's active policy toward China was specified at the Eastern Conference in the second half of June and at the Second Eastern Conference, which opened on August 30th in Daren. 104. At the Eastern Conference, which was attended by Japanese diplomats accredited in China, and which was attended by the leaders of the Ministry of War, the Guangdong Army and the General Staff, a program of action in China was developed. One of the conference participants was Consul General in Mukden Yoshida Shigeru. Even the published decisions adopted at the conference said that Mongolia and especially Manchuria are not only a subject of special concern for our country, that is, Japan. Moreover, the Japanese Empire, as their neighbor, considers itself responsible for maintaining peace in these areas, ensuring the development of their economy and turning these areas into territories where both the local population and foreigners could live peacefully. In the event of a threat of rioting in Manchuria and Mongolia, as a result, peace will be disturbed, and our position and our interests in these areas will be harmed. The empire should be prepared not to miss the opportunity and take the necessary measures to prevent the threat, no matter where it comes from, and thereby preserve these areas for the prosperity of the local population and foreigners. In order to maintain a special position there and secure for itself Manchuria and Mongolia, which were of vital importance for Japan, Japan took upon itself the preservation of public peace in these areas and took decisive self-defense measures, and thereby preserve these areas for the prosperity of the local population and foreigners. In order to maintain a special position there and secure for itself Manchuria and Mongolia, which were of vital importance for Japan, Japan took upon itself the preservation of public peace in these areas and took decisive self-defense measures, and thereby preserve these areas for the prosperity of the local population and foreigners. In order to maintain a special position there and secure for itself Manchuria and Mongolia, which were of vital importance for Japan, Japan took upon itself the preservation of public peace in these areas and took decisive self-defense measures. After the Manchu incident, 24, Japan's Deputy Foreign Minister for Political Affairs, Mari Kaku, who was the true organizer of the Eastern Conference, said, "I think that we can now talk about the decisions of the conference." From his words, it was clear that Japan, which sought to prevent China from turning red, intended, in accordance with the decisions of the conference 105, to tear away Manchuria and Mongolia from China and turn them into its sphere of influence. The sovereignty of these areas passed into the hands of Japan. She took on the task of maintaining public peace. But since expressing this directly was inconvenient, all this was presented to public opinion in the wrap of the Eastern Conference 25. On the territory torn away from China, it was supposed to create puppet states. Whatever forces interfere with the implementation of the Japanese plans, Mari Kaku said, all state power should fall upon them. Thanks to China, the report of Prime Minister Tanaka to the Emperor, based on the decisions of the Eastern Conference 26, became public. This report, known as the Tanaka Memorandum, begins as follows. In order to conquer China, we must first conquer Manchuria and Mongolia. In order to conquer the world, we must first conquer China. If we manage to conquer China, all the rest of Asia Minor countries, India, as well as the countries of the South Seas will be afraid of us and surrender to us. The world then will understand that East Asia is ours, and will not dare to challenge our rights. Having mastered all the resources of China, we will move on to the conquest of India, the countries of the South Seas, and then to the conquest of Asia Minor, Central Asia and finally Europe. But taking control of Manchuria and Mongolia is only the first step if the Yamato nation wants to play a leading role on the Asian continent. The Toyonaka Memorandum referred to a specific plan for the robbery of Manchuria and Mongolia. 27. Usually this document is presented to the international community as evidence of aggressive character of Japanese imperialism, but some of its parts contain 106 factual errors and you cannot trust them. But along with the above statement by Morikaku, this document can be used to clarify the nature of the decisions adopted by the Eastern Conference. The situation in East Asia and the accompanying actions of Japan that followed it developed in strict accordance with the Toyonaka Memorandum, so it became very difficult to dispel suspicions about the existence of this document. 28. Support for Chiang Kai-shek by the United States. The sending of troops by the Toyonaka government to Shandong was a prelude to intensifying the aggression of the imperialist powers in China. The strengthening of the counter-revolutionary forces grouped around the Nanking government, as well as the retreat of the revolutionary movement, provided them with an excellent opportunity for this. Although the United States, as well as England, France and other Western European states that had concessions in central and southern China, fought a stubborn struggle to seize the Chinese market, they nevertheless reached an agreement on the suppression of the revolution, the protection and expansion of their rights and interests in China. These states, using the events in Nanjing as an excuse, forced the new government to punish everyone involved in the leadership of the troops responsible for these events and ensure that the life and property of foreigners will not be damaged in any form. Moreover, in the Chinese government itself, which had previously achieved some unity, the contradictions between the various Kuomintang groups began to aggravate. Members of these groups associated with local armies, they handed out posts in institutions of the controlled region and posts in the army itself to their friends and relatives, and thus turned into new militarists. Between them began 107 squabbling. Each of these groups sought to establish its dominance over all of China or to control as much of the country as possible. The Nanjing Group, led by Chiang Kai-shek, at that time did not yet have enough strength to unite and lead the various Kuomintang factions. After the coup on April 12, Chiang Kai-shek clarified his foreign policy, emphasizing that the overthrow of imperialism would not be carried out by force and that the activities related to it would not be anti-foreign. After waiting a while, he announced a new, in fact, compromising foreign policy on the annulment of unequal treaties. Chiang Kai-shek sought to enlist such bonds by the support of foreign powers in suppressing the revolution. But in order to restrain the militarist groups that opposed Chiang Kai-shek, who might have been able to contact some powerful foreign power, it was necessary, using the contradictions between the imperialist powers, to establish contact with those foreign states that offer the most favorable conditions and enlist their support. The same was necessary for the unification of the country. These states Chiang Kai-shek considered the United States and Japan. The fact is that, after displacing England from China after the First World War, the United States began to quickly strengthen in the Chinese market, establishing a close relationship with the Shanghai bourgeoisie. Moreover, since the United States has put forward the principle of open doors, instead of the undisguised policy of partitioning China, which England and Japan had long been following, the Chinese people did not feel much hatred towards them. Therefore, Chiang Kai-shek believed that rapprochement with America did not threaten him with an accusation of betrayal of the homeland by the Chinese people, who quickly became clear under the influence of the National Revolution. During the preparation for the coup on April 12 and after, Chiang Kai-shek through the Zhejiang financial clique strengthened ties with the United 108 States and appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Nanking government Hua Zhaoshu, adjacent to the pro-American group. But, on the other hand, he could not ignore the fact that Japan could have had an exceptionally strong influence, since China is located in close proximity to the Japanese islands. In this regard, Chiang Kai-shek sent his ideological father Dai Jitao to Japan and continued to seek agreement with the Japanese. However, the United States did not like Chiang Kai-shek's double play. Chiang Kai-shek's unexpected departure from active participation in political life in September 1927. A formidable reason for this was the aggravation of internal contradictions in the Kuomintang was the result of the machinations of the United States and evidence of the powerlessness of the Chiang Kai-shek clique, which had lost the active support of a foreign state. Leaving the official post, Chiang Kai-shek arrived on a friendly visit to Japan, where he met with a number of influential people. What Chiang Kai-shek did during his stay in Japan, how the Japanese ruling classes reacted to him, is unknown, but judging by the situation prevailing at that time, and also considering the events following Chiang Kai-shek's return to China, it is doubtful that this visit was aimed at obtaining assistance from Japan and that the conditions for providing this assistance were discussed. After meeting with Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the right-wing Japanese groups Toyama Mitsuru said, "Mr. Chan is a person who will sincerely cooperate with Japan under any circumstances," hinting that Chiang Kai-shek completely agreed with Japan's plans to advance to the mainland. But judging by Chiang Kai-shek's statement made a little later, in which he noted 109 him to his puppet. According to another version, during the stay of Chiang Kai-shek in Japan, the American government concluded an agreement with him through the American ambassador to Tokyo, which stated, "The United States will help Chiang Kai-shek regain political power." They consider it necessary that he receive an audience with the Japanese emperor, and also recognize the special rights and interests of Japan and Manchuria and Nishihara's loan. Japan compensates for this by not interfering with his return to power. 29. It is not possible to establish the authenticity of the contents of this agreement, but one thing is clear: Tanaka's cabinet, which embarked on a firm foreign policy and helped Jiang Zemin under this flag, lost its flexibility and was unable to win Chiang Kai-shek to its side. In November 1927, Chiang Kai-shek retook office as president. Immediately after this, he announced a change in foreign policy, ceased to recognize the Soviet consulates in all areas of China under the pretext that they allegedly led a conspiracy aimed at overthrowing the Chinese government, searched the buildings of the Soviet consulates, arrested Soviet citizens, communists, and openly joined the anti-Soviet political course pursued by the United States. In March of the following year, addressing America, he declared, "I am determined to open a new era in Sino-U.S. diplomatic relations." Then the issue of the events in Nanjing had not yet been resolved. Meeting the demands of the American government, Chiang Kai-shek issued an arrest warrant for Lin Boqi, at that time the commander of the army occupying Nanjing, which the U.S. government has pointed out as the main culprit in the events in Nanjing. Promising foreigners to fully compensate 110 the damage he caused, he expressed deep regret about what had happened. The pro-American group Chiang Kai-shek has occupied all the leading posts in the government. So, Chiang Kai-shek appointed the brother of his wife, Sun Mailin Song Zi-wen, as Minister of Finance. Chiang Kai-shek himself, having concentrated huge political and military power in his hands, strengthened his dictatorship. In such an environment, in 1928, the United States officially recognized the Nanking government, renounced customs privileges, and entered into a new Sino-U.S. customs tariff agreement. Through these kinds of events, the United States has been able to expand its influence among the Chinese bourgeoisie and strengthen its position in China. Soon after, a large number of U.S. military and representatives of the powerful financial oligarchy were appointed advisors to the Chinese government on political, military, financial, transport and other issues. Through these advisors, the United States gained enormous privileges in China. Their policy on China, based earlier on the principle of open doors, was now aimed at achieving China's unity. In this way, the United States, together with the government led by the Central Nanking Group, sought to unite all the new and old militarists, supported by Japan and England, and to prevent the penetration of these two states into China. Jinan Incident. Opposing the United States, Japan began to force open military aggression in northern China. However, the Nanking government protested the dispatch of the first batch of Japanese troops to Shandong and demanded their withdrawal. The text of the protest read, "The National Army was given a firm order to protect the life and property of foreigners." This contributed to the strengthening of friendly relations with governments 111 foreign states. Despite this, Japan unilaterally violated international law. Nevertheless, Japan overlooked the demand of the Chinese government and at the beginning of 1928 sent 5,000 soldiers to China. Qingdao Jiaozhou district was occupied by the Japanese army. In March, 2 companies of Japanese troops located in northern China occupied Jinan. In this way, Japan demonstrated the Kuomintang army, which fought with Zhang Zuolin, its firm determination to occupy northern China. The aggressive actions of the Japanese provoked a growing indignation of the Chinese people. A wave of anti-Japanese movement spilled across northern China. Having rejected the encroachment of the Japanese troops on the sovereignty of China in the area, the Kuomintang army continued its offensive to the north and on May 1 entered Jinan, where both armies were located one against the other. In an effort to prevent the Kuomintang army from moving north to fight Zhang Zuolin, Japanese forces erected fortifications. However, the commander of the National Revolutionary Army ordered his troops to avoid rapprochement and clash with the Japanese army. At the same time, he invited the Japanese consul to his headquarters and demanded that he not interfere in the Chinese Civil War, as well as the destruction of defensive structures. The Japanese consul agreed with the demands of the Chinese commander. But Japan, which sent its troops to Shandong only by overcoming domestic resistance and spending most of its military spending on it, had to justify its actions. She decided to provoke the Chinese army into a clash, and then declare the need for protection of Japanese residents. After the Japanese units moved away from the fortification line, Japanese troops arbitrarily expanded their area of control. On May 3, a Kuomintang army soldier who crossed the border of this region was killed. Taking advantage of the indecision of the Chinese army, the Japanese forces launched a general offensive and forced it to retreat. After that, Japan imposed the following conditions on 112 China, demanding that they be answered within 12 hours. 1. The Chinese army departs from the Jinan-Jiaozhou line by 20 Chinese li. 2. In the territory occupied by Chinese troops, anti-Japanese propaganda and anti-Japanese movement are prohibited. 3. Top officials involved in the riots and violence shall be punished. 4. The troops that fought with the Japanese army should be disarmed. To top it all off, a Chinese representative was killed by Japanese troops on their way to negotiations. Hua Guo, head of the Foreign Affairs Department, who visited the headquarters of the Japanese army as a representative of the Chinese government, was abused. He was not allowed to eat and was kept in almost custody. Having increased the number of its troops in China by one more division, the third dispatch of troops, Japan increased its threats to the National Revolutionary Army. In this regard, the anti-Japanese movement has sharply intensified throughout the country. But Chiang Kai-shek gave the following instructions to his subordinates: the protection of Japanese residents is carried out in the interests of the entire state, and individuals must be patient, no matter what happens. Chiang Kai-shek agreed to the point that he even said, for the salvation of one Japanese can kill at least 10 Chinese. In this way, he sought to suppress the anti-Japanese movement and reach an agreement with Japan. Meeting all the requirements of the Japanese, he sought to at least temporarily save his position. During this period, the pro-American, anti-Soviet policy of Chiang Kai-shek was accompanied by a policy of pacification of Japan. The assassination of Zhang Zuolin, the Jinan incident, marked a turning point. After it, the tip of the anti-imperialist movement in China was directed mainly against Japan. Referring to the Toanaka Memorial, the Minister of Foreign 113 Minister of the Kuomintang government Wang Zhengting appealed to the League of Nations, accusing Japan of harboring aggressive designs against China. Meanwhile, the decisive Battle of Nanjing with Beijing, Chiang Kai-shek and Zhang Zuolin reached a climax. The army of Zhang Zuolin was threatened with defeat. On May 18, the Toanaka government issued a statement stating that while Manchuria is embraced by the fire of war, the imperial government is taking appropriate and effective measures to maintain public peace there. At the same time, it transferred the headquarters of the Kwantung Army from Port Arthur to Mukden. At the same time, the Japanese envoy in Beijing, Yoshizawa Kenkichi, was instructed to recommend Zhang Zuolin in order to strengthen his position in Manchuria to withdraw his troops behind the Great Wall of China. But Zhang Zuolin did not want to leave Beijing. When the Jinan incident occurred, Zhang Zuolin issued a statement, noting in it that Nanjing and Beijing should jointly confront the external enemy. In this way, he tried to reach an agreement with the Kuomintang government and retain political power. There were endless negotiations between Zhang Zuolin and Japan. Zhang Zuolin believed that if he did not follow the recommendations of Japan, then if his troops retreated to Manchuria in the event of defeat in a collision with the Kuomintang army, Japanese troops might block their path near Shanhaiguan. In the face of such a threat, Zhang Zuolin finally decided to leave Yanzishan and Beijing and leave for Mukden. At 1 a.m. on June 3, he boarded a special train in Beijing heading for Mukden. In a telegram from Beijing posted in the Asahi newspaper, the following is said about this event. 114 tears flashed in the eyes of Mr. Zhang, who cast a last look at the Nan Groves. On May 20, the Eastern Conference opened in Tokyo, attended by persons associated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Finance, as well as with the Army and Navy. It discussed the response to the United States' request of warning, expressing concern over Japan's genuine plans for Manchuria and instructions sent to the Kwantung Army, which was on full alert and was waiting for an opportunity. It's not known exactly what the goal was pursued by Deputy Foreign Minister for Political Affairs Mori Kaku, who actually acted as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the military associated with him when they pushed the vacillating Prime Minister Tanaka. In this case, even threats like the following were launched statements: if Tanaka himself does not agree, he will be forced to resign to organize an incident in China after sending troops to Shandong. However, there is no doubt that they set themselves the task of using the military force to achieve the independence of Manchuria. But the United States put pressure on the cabinet. The Emperor Zhengting first appealed to the United States for help and asked them to give a warning to Japan. This U.S. warning contained harsh attacks on Prime Minister Tanaka and senior officials from his entourage. These attacks served as the main reason for the delay in the implementation of plans on the mainland. Mori's cherished dream, but the United States put pressure on the cabinet. The Emperor Zhengting first appealed to the United States for help and asked them to give a warning to Japan. This U.S. warning contained harsh attacks on Prime Minister Tanaka and senior officials from his entourage. These attacks served as the main reason for the delay in the implementation of plans on the mainland. Mori's cherished dream, but the United States put pressure on the cabinet. The Emperor Zhengting first appealed to the United States for help and asked them to give a warning to Japan. This U.S. warning contained harsh attacks on Prime Minister Tanaka and senior officials from his entourage. These attacks served as the main reason for the delay in the implementation of plans on the mainland. Mori's cherished dream. 30. On May 25 at night, Tanaka decided to suspend all actions. The Kwantung Army, relocated to Mukden, was faced with the urgent need to return to the area of its former deployment. On June 4, at 5:30 a.m., the special train Zhang Zuolin was traveling in was about 1 kilometer from Mukden. Deafening suddenly, 115 explosion, and the train flew into the air. Blood appeared on Zhang Zuolin's martial uniform. He was dead. Regarding the incident, the Japanese War Department said that this is undoubtedly the work of partisans supporting the Nanking government. However, the Zhonro Prince Sionji, having received a notification of the incident, began to doubt, "This is a very strange event. They don't tell anyone this, but is the Japanese army to blame?" It was impossible to hide the truth, and Tanaka was forced to report to the emperor the following: "As for the incident involving the explosion of Jiangsu Lin train, I suspect that the imperial army there were a number of instigators. In this regard, I today ordered the Minister of War to investigate 31. However, the Japanese government and the army decided to bury the case and indefinitely postponed the investigation. Meanwhile, the Chinese boycott movement for Japanese goods posed a real threat to Osaka financial circles, which played a major role in trade with China. For example, if 190,000 1032 cotton fabrics were exported from China in May 1928, then in August their export was reduced to 17,010. In this regard, criticism of the Tanaka cabinet intensified. Taking advantage of the situation, former Foreign Minister Saidahara and Party President Minsaito Hamaguchi made public statements in Osaka condemning Tanaka's foreign policy.